Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Lots of stuff going on, and of course, today we have a fantastic show for you. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Stephen Dinan is a social entrepreneur, a political strategist, is the CEO of the Shift Network, who has also held senior positions at the Institute of Noetic Sciences and Esalen Institute. The author of Radical Spirit, he is a graduate of Stanford University and the California Institute of Integral Studies. He's recently released his new book, Sacred America, Sacred World, Fulfilling Our Mission in Service to All. So thank you so much for joining us today, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Bernard.
Well, we're very grateful to have you here, especially to talk about your new book and the manifesto. And Stephen, let me ask you, starting the conversation, as I was looking back on your work over the past few years, you were able to go to Occupy Wall Street, and was that kind of gave you the how shall I say, the inspiration to put together this manifesto?
You know, that came a little bit later. I would say there was a long phase in which I primarily focused on practices of personal growth and development. I studied at the CIS and worked for the Esalen Institute. I did a whole range of things in psychology and spirituality, and really believed that in order to evolve our culture, we needed to first and foremost evolve ourselves. And so I focused more on that side of the equation. And as you know, then ultimately you get to the point where you say, well, you can only do so much in terms of becoming a healthier individual without a healthier society. And ultimately we have to take responsibility for evolving our world and our society. And so that's where the spark that really ignited me in the political realm was Dennis Kucinich's first candidacy for president in 2004, partially because he not only offered progressive policies, but a kind of a visionary and uplifting message that had a spiritual depth to it that I found was lacking in the political realm. And part of what happens is when you are forced to check certain parts of yourself at the door, a lot of times we don't feel fully welcome, like all of us isn't embraced in our politics. And so what we did with that campaign is we had a whole tour, we had music events, poetry, we would bring in all these other dimensions of ourselves into our politics. We call them convergences. And that really sparked me with the possibility of saying, you know what, we can bring together our spiritual side and our activist side, our deeper philosophical side, and our political side, and bring them together and actually be whole people and engaged in the process of evolving our politics and our society.
Hear, hear, yes. And with that, I have to say, I remember back when I first started doing this work publicly, I had this, I guess it was a ingrained habit, and maybe we all have this or have had it in the past, of keeping my political activism on one side and then my spiritual work on the other side. And it wasn't until maybe 2008 when I started realizing that they can be one thing that I discovered the word spiritual activism. And I said, wow, isn't that a great way of bringing two things together, working on ourselves, connecting with everything, the all, so to speak, and being able to still get this work done in a more holistic way. Would you say that Americans have a tendency to separate, as I did in the past? Is it difficult for us to bring it together?
It's very difficult. I mean, I think you could make some case there's a legacy of the whole separation of church and state, so that we're supposed to bracket our spiritual or religious beliefs when we engage our politics. But the truth is that we are whole beings, and actually the great wisdom traditions have passed down a lot of knowledge about how to evolve a more enlightened consciousness, and that's really relevant and important for how do we evolve a more enlightened society, and particularly to do so in a way that brings people together rather than separates them. That's one of the core theses of my book, is that we need to now have an American evolution where everybody is welcome. So it's not about a revolution where it's one side is just overpowering the other. It's really about saying we're all on the same team. Ultimately, as spiritual beings, we incarnate here to help participate in our society continuing to go to the next level. And so even people that might appear to have very different political orientations can ultimately be seen as being part of the same team. As sometimes we're holding different sides of a polarity, or there's kind of a tension, evolutionary tension between those sides. But when we can embrace that and see that we can learn from each other and do what I call political cross-training, where I'm a pretty strong progressive, but I actually like to read and understand conservative viewpoints because it actually makes me think more deeply about things. It makes me surface biases I might have, and I'll actually design better policies, because the best policies are going to work for people who are very conservative and progressive and lead us forward.
And there are similarities on all sides or spectrum of the political arena. One of the things that I had a difficult time, I guess, transcending was this idea that we had to be, or that most activist events or political events always were the against. That a great example. I was just recently invited to a rally against Bob Goodlatte. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the representative here in Virginia. Very conservative, very Tea Party. And they wanted to do, and they did actually do, a very negative, he's the bad guy. He just horrible signs and whatnot. And I could not align myself with that aspect of activism. Would you say that this is a time now in our political arena that perhaps we need to stop going against each other and start supporting what we are for together?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of why in my book I'm really going into a vision for a new American dream, a new era for America, and one that in which we really fulfill a deeper spiritual impulse. And so when you have a vision that you're working towards, there's psychologists call that a superordinate goal. And that can help you break down some of the barriers and polarizations when you have a shared mission, if you will. And so I think that the evolution of a next America that goes beyond some of the corruption of our politics by money, some of the lobbyist influence, the bitter divisions, and to really see that we want to design a society that's peaceful and prosperous, that is healthy and sustainable, and that we're doing our best to balance all these different qualities. And sometimes it takes more conservative ideas, sometimes it takes more progressive ideas, sometimes it takes out-of-the-box thinking that doesn't even come from any political persuasion. But we have to have that openness to the new possibility in order to really fulfill this larger mission. So when we find a shared mission, it's sort of which I source in things like clues that you can find throughout our history, like E pluribus unum as a national motto, out of many one. That actually points us to something much deeper than a political unification. It's really about a movement towards larger wholes. And that's where activism often can fall short, because it can be short-term, focused on the demand, and these are the bad guys who are preventing us from getting what we want, but it doesn't actually create the unification that allows things to move forward. So Gandhi was a great teacher of this. He trained his satyagrahas not just in nonviolence, but in really holding the oppressors, in this case the British, in a space of love, and because he recognized that for the society to truly evolve, the British needed to evolve as well, and we do that better in a space of love and appreciation and respect, while also voicing differences and bringing viewpoints forward. I don't think we have to go passive. In fact, Gandhi really charted a path where you could be a very active force in changing the society, but to do so with peace in your heart and with love for those that you're trying to change. And that ultimately creates a different ground. It's less violent, it's more evolutionary, and it's more lasting because everybody's on board versus just simply overwhelming the last guard of things. And so, and I think that when you really look at how evolution proceeds in individuals or species, there's a deep conservation of what's worked because it's essential for life. And so in the society, oftentimes the more conservative impulse is focused more on preserving what has worked, what's already great about our society. And so we have to respect that impulse even while we're trying to change and evolve things to the next level. And that means respecting and really being honoring, even if people aren't being honoring in return. I think it is important to hold that higher ground because eventually it does translate into people finding more of a sense of feeling seen, respected, and heard, and therefore more willing to work together. I think that just as an example, in the whole gay rights movement, which has proceeded really very quickly and historically in the last 10 years, part of the what really was required is for more gay people to come out. And so the more people that you knew and actually had a friendship with, that was the more likely that people started to shift their opinions and be more supportive of gay rights and eventually gay marriage. And so this sense of like building friendships and building alliances across divides is really at the core of how society evolves. And so that's part of why I'm going to Cleveland, not to protest, but I want to try to meet more Republican leaders and build more friendships. And that's going to strengthen me as a change agent and somebody who is trying to paint a more unifying picture of where we're going. And there's, as an example, Rich Toffel is one of the founders of the Log Cabin Republicans and one of the early advocates of gay marriage. He ended up endorsing my book. Even though I'm a progressive, he feels that I'm doing a good job of charting the pathway to a next evolution that's more respectful.
And that's a great way of a great direction to be going, and I agree. Most people in this country, we label ourselves and each other as red and blue. I like to kid around and say I'm purple. I'm a staunch independent, and I support issues, not people. I align with the candidate's vision versus their party. For example. I've been called a liberal. I've been called, an extremist for supporting Bernie Sanders. Meanwhile, I do not support the Democratic Party. I consider myself, like what you say in your book, transpartisan. For people that don't understand that concept, what is transpartisanism?
Transpartisan just means that to a large degree, we identify as something larger than the parties. And we can still be a Democrat or a progressive or a libertarian or whatever we want to align with politically, but we're actually linked to something bigger. So the transpartisan movement consists of people who are from all political persuasions and recognize that we need to have this higher identity, really as American citizens or citizens of the world. Or you can even just think of us as the human family, and so that our identity is beyond partisan, and that a lot of times our policies are beyond partisan. So it sounds like you're kind of a natural transpartisan yourself, even while you still support political candidates, you still might get involved on activism on different issues, but you're not letting your identity be fully consumed by just one slice of who you are.
Yeah, and I feel that's something that all of us need to do eventually. I just had a discussion with I believe it was an Episcopal priest about, next time we need to get progressives surrounding and supporting a candidate. And I said, well, we already did that, and the party wouldn't allow them to become the nominee. It seems that we've been in the cycle of, okay, well, next time we'll do better. Next time we'll do better. America has seemed to have been in the cycle of, what I call it the insanity cycle, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We keep voting left to get rid of the right. We keep voting right to get rid of the left. What do you think is called for here as a society for us to really get the candidate that we want and not the one that is being sold to us with, well, of course, through all the lobbyists and all the money that's being poured into their campaigns. Yes, of course, getting rid of Citizens United might be helpful, but is there something more that we can do to stop this cycle?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, getting rid of Citizens United and having a constitutional amendment to get the money out of politics does mean that we can have a political process that more accurately reflects the will of the voters. However, I do think that what we really need is to evolve both the Republican and Democratic parties to the next level. We need more enlightened Republicans and more enlightened Democrats, rather than simply overthrowing or having, from the outside. And so I think the Bernie Sanders campaign has been a great example of somebody who is more of an outsider Democratic Party. He ran within it. And I think at this next phase, what he really needs to do is help evolve the Democratic Party rather than become an outsider again. He's earned a seat at the table of power. Now, it may not be that you get all the changes right away, but that's part of the thing with democracy, is that we have to be more patient. We have to actually convince other people rather than simply overpower them. We need to convince more and more people, and it does work eventually, that we do, whether it's get the women the right to vote or have civil rights or get gay marriage through. But it has to be through this process of gradually convincing other people that there is this higher possibility, and that's how we get there. Now, Bernie's already had a tremendous impact on the Democratic Party as well as Hillary Clinton. So I think what he needs to shift from being the revolutionary on the outside to being the evolutionary on the inside, who's really working as a team member to help evolve things and to reform where appropriate, and to help the party itself evolve. It's not to say that third parties aren't valuable, but I think that there's a natural reason why we've kind of polarized into Republican and Democratic primary parties. And it connects actually with more human psychology and family psychology. George Lakoff did a great analysis showing that the Republican Party is more connected to the strict father archetype, and that the Democratic Party is more connected to the nurturing mother. So the strict father wants more on defense and protection and self-responsibility and discipline, and the nurturing mother wants to take care of more people in many ways. And so when you see that as sort of like our first templating, that there's kind of, for most people anyway, at least until we had more gay marriage, that it was like mostly templated off the kind of the father-mother archetypes in our collective psyche. And so then we sort of outpicture that with our political parties. But instead of having a healthy family, we have mom and dad at war with each other, essentially, in our collective. And that doesn't create a healthy family. And it in fact creates a sort of a trauma, if you will, because we look to our political leaders. Well, I believe a sacred worldview is one in which we see and respect and honor the divinity in everyone and really all of creation. And so it's not about a particular religion or a particular religious belief, but about really seeing things with the eyes of blessing and appreciating the whole panoply of creation. And so when you do that, it's like everybody becomes an ally. There's not really any enemies in a sacred worldview. Is that we're seeing that everybody has a role to play, that there is a place for everybody, and we can actually relate to the divinity in them. It's the same principle underneath the satyagrahas from Gandhi, as I was talking about before. Is like when you really see through this a spiritual eye, like the beauty and the potential in every being, you relate to them in a different way. And so a sacred America is one in which we're really honoring everybody's right. We're respecting everybody's right. There's, liberty and justice for all is partially a value that's sourced in a sacred worldview. And I also think it's important that we relate to America as a concept and as an entity in a way that has a level of respect and devotion and even admiration in it, even while we're trying to be change agents. A lot of people who identify more as change agents can get into a mode where we're so busy critiquing and being disgusted by this or that we actually lose a sense of real love and respect and honor for that which we're trying to evolve. And that actually creates some dissonance, it creates some distance, and it creates some backlash. So I think we have to hold both things at the same time. As one is to really honor the deeper spiritual principles and sacred principles on which this country was created and built and grew, and some of our real breakthroughs and the great gifts that we bring to the world. While on the other, we have to look just as rigorously at the shadow and where we've been out of integrity, where we've created genocide with the native peoples, or where we've perpetuated slavery and oppression, or where we have been out of integrity with our power and with ultimately being in service to the larger good. And so if we hold them both at the same time, we have more compassion for the ways that we failed to live up to our ideals. And we also have the fuel of the deep love and appreciation, and rather than cynicism, to actually help things get better and help them go to the next level. Because the truth is, we always do, we eventually, right things. The American people are very optimistic and forward-looking, and we're pioneers and innovators by nature. And so we eventually do the right thing, but it often takes us a while.
That's the truth. I can't help but feel some of our listeners are going, "Oh, but you want me to love George Bush or Clinton or anybody that might be considered, an enemy of the people," and how hard it is to get to that point where we realize that there's still human beings that have the right to exist. We may not agree with their actions, we may not agree with their policy, but they're still human beings on this planet going through their own lessons in life. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions. We got another minute before the commercial.
Yeah. Well,
of how can we embrace them even though they're different?
Well, I'll give an example from my own life. Sarah Palin, when she was the vice presidential nominee, she was like nails on a chalkboard for me. I really felt more hate than I had felt in a long time. And so I recognized that as a problem. So I read both of her books, and I really took the time to see the world through her eyes and appreciate what she'd gone through. And it was good. By the end of that journey, I had a dream where we actually had a sweet connection, and I ended up hugging her in the dream. So, and out of that, then I wrote an article on Huffington Post called Dissolving the Palin Prejudice. And so there was a real healing in my own heart. And it wasn't just about Sarah Palin, it was about the people she represented and the culture that she was coming out of. And before, I was really rejecting that culture, and I feel like I opened more to an appreciation for it. Even if I don't share the political beliefs of Sarah Palin, I could relate to her as a human being rather than as a negative image to dislike.
I can relate to that. We are here at a commercial break. We'll be right back to continue our discussion with Stephen Dinan.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are the #1 listener-supported radio station in the world, and it's through your contributions that we can continue sharing these programs with you at no cost. So if you are on the freedomslips.com website, take a moment and make a small donation. Every little bit helps. Coming back to our talk today with Stephen Dinan. Welcome back, Stephen. I'm one of these people that believe that there is an awakening happening, and I get lots of emails from people from all over the world that believe there's some kind of shift happening, whether it be in the United States or whether it be a global shift. But many people seem to be, quote unquote, awakening to an understanding that what maybe they've been taught isn't necessarily true. That they're seeing more and more of the corruption within the quote unquote system coming to the surface, and many of us believe this is a part of our evolution. In your book, you talk about shifting towards something new. What do you feel that we're shifting toward, whether it be politically here in the United States and or in the world as a whole?
I believe, first of all, I'm very aligned with the sense that there is a collective shift happening. I believe we're right in that critical window when it's beginning to reach a critical mass of people as well, and that this decade is very important for that collective awakening. What I believe we're awakening into, and what I know from my own experience, is a real sense of global interconnection, a real sense of oneness with all of humanity and really our whole human family. it's a next level of embodying a divine consciousness in our human body. So there's our divinity and our humanity merged together. And when that happens, we begin to see the world through a more holistic lens. We see people's journey as more of a journey of souls evolving and growing. We are more naturally peace builders. We're more likely to create holistic and conscious businesses. We're more likely to deal with health concerns in a holistic, multidimensional, mind, body, spirit kind of way. So we have all these different spiritual practices from around the world, from yoga to meditation to also merging with Western psychology. And so there's all these technologies for growth that were generally available only to a small group of people historically, and now they're available to all of humanity. And so there's an acceleration happening, and more people having experiences or pops into this sense of a more unified consciousness where that is built on oneness. And so what I see is that Sacred America, Sacred World is an expression of that in the political sphere. Like, how do we translate a spiritual awakening into a political awakening and vice versa? And so that's a lot about awakening to a higher mission for our country, recognizing that America literally has a soul to it that is guiding the development of our country, and that it has a still higher expression than we have yet achieved. And so that we're all, to some degree, in service to that. And it's coded in so many different things, from the Constitution that says, we're here to create a more perfect union, to e pluribus unum, which means out of many one. So you can find a lot of these codes that really are living from a place of oneness, and then expressing that in liberty and justice for all. But we sometimes get caught up in the liberties without the justice for all, or the justice for all without the liberties, and sometimes forget the higher spiritual ground that connects us, all of us. And then we get back into the enemies and try and destroy different enemies or overwhelm them and this kind of revolutionary fire, which ultimately tends to backfire because it separates us from parts of ourselves. Because once you realize that we are ultimately interconnected on a deep level, when we do battle with somebody on the outside, we're actually separating from a part of ourselves, and so that keeps us smaller and more disconnected from our fullness as a sacred being.
Yes, and we covered a little bit about political activist mentality being cautious about the idea of spirituality. I believe that true spiritual alignment, and I've been quoted around the social media in saying this, that a true spiritual alignment will eventually lead to this need for social and to help society, a need to help change things externally. And so I wonder what you would say to those that are consider themselves to be very spiritual, very awakened, very enlightened, but have absolutely no inkling to get involved with politics or activism. That's kind of like ignoring that dark shadow self, so to speak. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, it's not a very real or lasting spiritual enlightenment that doesn't ultimately care about our brothers and sisters around the world. It's like there's a natural flowering of compassion for the situation of others. It's a hallmark of true enlightenment. So enlightenment or a spiritual practice that just removes us from the world and allows us to only feel good in our own little bubble world ultimately backfires, because then if we are truly becoming more enlightened, and we don't help the society evolve, there's going to be some sort of backlash effect, and that's happened many times historically. So they kind of have to go together. It's like the Buddhists have the bodhisattva vow, if you will, is like you don't just have the enlightened individual, you come back and help to enlighten the society. And that's also embedded in Jewish notions of tikkun olam, that the true realized being is helping to repair the broken shards of the world, and it's also very central for Christianity as well. So there's a sense in which once you have an experience or a taste of the non-separation, then the healing and liberation and transformation of others is just as valuable and important as yourself. I mean, you don't have as much control over it because we still do have this separate identity. And so we have more control over our own growth and enlightenment. But ultimately, it does boil down to a kind of sacred service and sacred activism to help to bring our world into alignment with the deeper truth that we're evolving into ourselves personally.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you mentioned in your book as well that, and you had mentioned here in this talk, that America has some shadow issues that it hasn't faced yet. I'm one of these people that believe we cannot, and like I mentioned before, we cannot hide from our shadow self. I believe that our shadow selves are a part of the whole, and we must either come to peace with it, embrace it, and become one with it, not necessarily let it guide us or overshadow our work. But as a country as a whole, what are some of the significant shadow issues that we haven't looked at?
Well, we certainly have a big issue around Native American genocide. We've never really faced that in a deep way and made it a part of our national dialogue and narrative, the way that Germany had to do with the Holocaust. The truth is that the Native American genocide on which our country was founded was actually larger than the Holocaust itself. So we, the 14 million Native Americans who were present here before white settlers came in, and only a million 100 years later. So it was a massive loss of culture and life, and also a great missed opportunity to learn from the wisdom that those cultures had developed, which we still have a little bit of an opportunity to do now. And I think it's important that we do, because a lot of Native cultures live in a greater state of reverence for the sacredness of all life. They live in greater harmony with nature, a greater respect for animals, for plants, and ultimately the good of the tribe. And those are all virtues and skills that can help to balance some of our tendency to be a bit full of ourselves and maybe arrogant, and sometimes too full of our power, which can become very destructive. So we need some of that humbling and the grounding and the focus on the good of the whole that a lot of Native cultures could have brought us. You can apply the same principle with African American culture. We still have a great shadow there around the legacy of slavery and the downstream repercussions of that on people and economic ability and subconscious racism. And so that's another big area of shadow. And there's also a shadow, I'd say, that we're probably further along in rebalancing around masculine and feminine. So we've really aimed to create this culture based on unity, but it was imbalanced from masculine to feminine. And so we need to bring more and more women into the leadership positions, and also to bring more of the feminine side of men forward in leadership positions. And that creates a more balanced political culture, which tends to create more collaboration, more bridges built, versus the strong assertion of individualism that guys left by themselves will tend to become more individualistic in many ways, rather than focusing on the collaborative solutions. And so our culture is, at the political level, is still not balanced between masculine and feminine. So there are some areas. I mean, we obviously have a lot of shadow areas that it sounds like you explore on this station, in terms of our politics, our geopolitics. You just have to read my friend John Perkins' book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, to see that there's a whole shadow side of how America is related to the rest of the world in terms of enslaving other countries, basically economically, and taking out leaders of other countries. There's a dark history around all that needs to be faced as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, definitely. It seems as if, as well, and I'm wondering if you could comment on this, that many people have come to the point where they feel that nothing can change, that it is the way it is, that money has such a stronghold on our politics and our world as a whole, that they've just given up. What could you say to motivate people to believe that there could be change?
Well, first of all, just look historically. It's like every generation we've had a constitutional amendment. So if people are worried about money and politics and the corrupting influence, get involved with the movement. Wolfpack is doing a great job of working on a constitutional amendment to get the money out of politics. So every generation, we're faced with crises and challenges. And I like to use the metaphor of an operating system because, if you have an operating system on your computer, it eventually starts to get buggy and it starts to break down in different ways, and you eventually have to upgrade the operating system. So there can be a frustration with the operating system, but you can just complain about it and say, "Wow, this is a crappy operating system and it's not going to do anything." Or you can say, "You know what? It's time to upgrade the operating system, and I actually have a lot of power to make change." So people, what I think is good for people to do is focus first on areas if they feel really disillusioned. Focus first on things that are small things that you can feel like you made an impact. To do that in your local community. If you're concerned about the political climate, it's like create a living room conversation. There's a great new organization that has a template for creating living room conversations that are transpartisan and that really heal some political divides. If you're concerned about the polarization with Islamic countries now, do what I do, is make Kiva.org loans to developing world entrepreneurs in Islamic countries and help them start the sewing businesses that are going to help to bring prosperity to their village. So I'd make little loans to people in Pakistan or the West Bank of Palestine. So it's like these little acts. When we can get depressed when we witness a lot of things without action. So actions, even small actions that bump things in the right direction, ultimately free up our creative energy and free up our sense of being empowered change agents that we can make a difference. We're not overnight going to be able to shift large scale social issues. Like we're not going to overnight be able to, reform the Federal Reserve. But what we can do is, like, there's in the banking system arena, for instance, there's some great examples of public banking that are starting to happen. The North Dakota Public Bank has been a real reform in that area and has been a great example of how people can take back the creation of money for the good of the people rather than good of private interests. And it's been super successful and helped to propagate that. You can let your political officials know about it. You can get involved with the movement there. So part of what I do in Sacred America, Sacred World is chronicle a lot of the positive, forward-looking solutions and opportunities. And they're really in every domain. It's not like you have to just get beyond receiving negative information from the national media and focus on where are the solutions happening, where are the breakthroughs happening. And then it's really quite exciting. It's exciting and empowering. You're like, wow, I can have an impact on ending child sex slavery. I can have an impact on helping to create more of a peace infrastructure, like Friends Committee on National Legislation. We've done some lobbying with them both in DC and locally, and they're really great at organizing spiritually based change agents who want to create more peace in the world to influence legislators. And it's actually very empowering to go in and connect with and learn from the people who are in the offices of our elected representatives. So these small actions are additive, and they ultimately take us out of our zone of feeling kind of cynical or apathetic, or that change can't happen. Because the truth is, change does happen. For a long time, nobody thought we could ever end slavery. I mean, it was decades of people who had to work really slogging away at slavery. But we have ended slavery, and we have given women the right to vote, and we have ratified the right of gay people to get married. And these things, we do make progress. It just is on a long time scale, and it takes building from lots of little actions.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There seems to be this idea that we're going to wake up tomorrow and everything's going to change. And I finally have come at peace that it's not going to happen tomorrow. But with that being said, there are some big events coming up. Back in April, I was happy to participate in the Democracy Spring action that we did at the Capitol. And now I'm considering about going to the Philadelphia action that they're doing. But there's more people beside Democracy Spring that are going to be there, other organizations. And I'm wondering, with this, it could become very heated. It could become very violent for all we know. I hope not. But with the Democratic Convention and all of the activists that are going to be there, what do you feel could be the best case scenario of actually getting something done during those protests? How do you see that coming out in a good way?
I think that, yeah, I think that I would just encourage more people to think about ways to build bridges rather than just to protest and to be creative. Like I'm going to Cleveland and to Philadelphia, partially because I want to be a part of things, but I'm more interested in building connections than I am in making protests. And I'm staying with a woman who has been involved in creating this encircle the city with love. They're doing a kind of half an hour linked hands meditation. A lot of global churches have got involved to create a city of love. They're also making offers of cuddle. Any Republican delegate that would love to have cuddling. They've got this whole like cuddling activism,
Great.
and so I thought it was just wonderfully charming to have something like that because it's saying, you know what, we're not just going to sit here and protest. We actually want to love you up and help you go to the next level because people don't generally grow and evolve very much under kind of it's sort of threats of violence and it's kind of angry energy. It's like it tends to create more distance, and what we need to actually do is reunite the human family more. So I understand the impulse to create different kinds of activism, and I think just thinking about it in a different way. Like for me, activism is ultimately to convince people that of a better way. That's the deepest kind of activism. And sometimes a street protest may be necessary, but it may be that, just having a deep conversation with somebody who doesn't think like you, but you can actually find common ground and find your shared humanity might actually have a bigger impact. So, when I go to Cleveland, I'm more interested in talking to Republican delegates than protesting.
Yes, I agree. For some reason, I've never been motivated by a waving finger or someone wagging their finger at me. Pointing fingers doesn't help. With that being said, we're running out of time, but I do believe that we are seeing, like you said, a moment in time here where we are having evolutionary movements coming out and being seen. What are some tips that you can help our listeners into building an evolutionary movement?
Well, I think it starts with first in our own hearts. I gave the example before of reading positions that you don't necessarily agree with, not just out of curiosity and to understand them better. For instance, a friend recommended that I read a book called Liberal Fascism, and I haven't read much of it yet, but it's written by a very right-wing person, and it's helped me to understand how where people on the right often feel like the change from the progressive side can feel imposed in a kind of totalitarian way. And it made me more sensitive to that and understand it in a different kind of a way. So that there's a certain amount of this personal education. Then there's like the interpersonal circle where it's like, let's building bridges across divides and can we convene a living room conversation with people who think very differently than us? And then perhaps it's doing so in the community. There might be a letter to the editor or writing a column online or sharing on your Facebook page, something that is more about building bridges and understanding than it is about simply stating your opinion more forcefully. Because that's where we always get in trouble. If like we just get into a slugging match of whose opinion is more important or more valid, it can often lead to burnout because there's not something that's creating and generating. Like when you build the connections and things evolve and there's kind of a flow of energy, it's more additive than when it's sort of just like, I'm just going to hammer away at something and just keep saying the same things over and over again. That's where activists tend to burn out because there's not as much of the generative energy coming in. So undertaking spiritual practices that help evolve us to a more collaborative model and to really respect and honor the divinity in all other beings, and to take action in a way that is ultimately as non-polarizing as possible, which I was giving the examples from Cleveland is like some very creative ways to build, to kind of make a statement, but to do so in a way that's ultimately more about recognizing our oneness rather than our separation.
Here, here, and that is a great way to start it. I couldn't agree more. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today, Stephen Dinan. Where can people find your book? I'm excited to get a copy.
Great. Happy to send you one. Yes. Sacredamerica.net. We actually have a big launch campaign today. It's our launch date. And so if you go there, we have over $500 in extra bonuses when you buy the book today and then you register. So it's our way of saying thanks to help get out the word. We're just hit 65 at Amazon, and we want to kind of keep boosting up the visibility. We just got a copy of this in the hands of Hillary Clinton last week, and I'm going to try to get the hands in a copy of some Republican leaders in a couple more weeks, because I really feel like the more we can help to heal the situation and transcend some of our bitter partisanship, the more we're going to activate a vision of like that's really inspiring for where we can go as a country.
Yes, I
So
couldn't agree.
sacredamerica.net. Sacredamerica.net.
.net. Okay, very, very good. So everybody, you got that. Make sure you get a copy. I'm sure it's going to be a great read. Stephen, stay on the line. We next week, I just want to let everybody know that we have Brendan Culleton from Paradigm Shift Central will be joining us live, and he is a spiritual activist. He'll be joining us live next week.